San Diego Comic-Con 2020, what is up? I am Ryan J. Downey, and I am here with the Soundtrack to Fandom panel presented by Z2 Comics. Now, as you probably know, Z2 has been at the forefront of the intersection of music and comic books for the last few years, with a lot of great projects still in the pipeline. We're going to be gathering together some creatives who are behind some of these books, that are bringing together some of the most iconic names in music, some up-and-comers, and of course, some of our favorite writers and illustrators in the comic book medium. So let's get things kicked off here. The Twisted Tales of the Ritalin Club, the debut graphic novel from Yungblud, has been one of Z2's fastest selling books. I was able to catch up with Yungblud to talk all about it. We chatted. He was in an undisclosed location. So what was your first encounter with comic books as a medium, and what do you think about the intersection of comics and music?
It kind of shaped the character that I wanted to portray as an artist, really. You know what I mean? As I say, I was like a massive fan of DC because they were kind of very gritty for me, and I think the Joker was a big part of who I am. You know what I mean? Look at my haircut and shit. You know what I mean? Like, I think growing up in the north of England, I was someone who wanted to wear makeup and wear a dress and like kind of dye my hair, and it was not seen as normal. It was seen as quite bizarre when I was a young kid. And I remember I would look forward to Halloween because I would get to put on my Joker makeup because I loved the feeling of wearing makeup. And I think in terms of my sexuality, I was quite confused about, I don't know, what I was, and if I had to label anything at all, because sexuality wasn't really talked about where I was from, but kind of, I really confided in that character. I know he's a complete raging psychopath.
There is that.
There is that thing to touch upon, but I really confided in him because he spoke for the little guys. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And that idea that you can build a larger-than-life character from anonymity.
Absolutely.
We don't know much about where he came from.
And I think that's why I enjoyed the new film so much and what Joaquin did, because it kind of made me feel the sympathy that I felt for him my whole life. And I was like, finally, like, why did everyone always side with the Waynes? They were like the capitalist elite, you know what I mean? And everyone else underneath didn't matter. And that's what I thought was so beautiful about the movies, you know what I mean? The movie, you know?
Yeah, and that ties back into the Manchester thing as well, because when I think about Manchester, it's, you know, very working class and very blue collar values and very like
completely
anti that whole power structure.
Completely, and I think that was it. But it was kind of a power structure in its own because of its working class in terms of sexuality and makeup and expression. That was a side that was almost, they were the Waynes to that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
so I was like, I was facing a double battle here. And it kind of made me feel really, really scared. And as I say, I kind of wanted to start writing comics because I wanted to give my fan base a genuine physical world that they could fall into, like I did. Like when the songs, when you've listened to the song 20 times in a day, when you've been to the gigs, when you sing, and you sat at home on your own, and everything goes quiet and silent, you can fall into a physical world that you can have your own interpretation of, that can mean something different to you than it does to somebody else. And I remember I was literally in Germany one night and I was like wired. I was kind of upset. I felt very anxious. I had a knot in my stomach and I was like, I couldn't quite figure out why. And I was like, I'm going to write a comic book. And I spoke to my friend Ryan O'Sullivan, who I collaborated with on the things, because we just get each other. And I kind of rang him really late at night, and he was like, yo. I was like, we should do this, and this. I've had an idea to make this comic about the Ritalin Club, which is kind of like my fan base, and the way that society tries to place these metaphorical masks on us to normalize us because people are afraid of things they don't understand. And Ryan was like, I love it. And then that whole thing happened, and it kind of went mental. Like, I just kind of put it out as like, cool, man, we'll see what happens. And then it just went absolutely mad.
I love that idea of the Ritalin Club too, because it reminds me of, again, the lineage of larger than life rock characters and their respective fan bases, whether it's the Kiss Army or the MC Army,
Absolutely.
or the Misfits Fiend Club or the Despair Faction. Like, I think it really fits right in there.
Absolutely. And I think the thing about it is like, my fan base is called the Black Arts Club, and I didn't want to call it like the Black Arts Club. I wanted to give them another layer. And the Ritalin Club is like, I have ADHD, and they tried to prescribe me as a kid, as a nipper, but I just think it was kind of a realization that my handicap, if you like, wasn't a handicap at all. Because of that illness, because of that defect that everyone called it, it allowed me to find people that loved me for genuinely who I am, and vice versa. So the Ritalin Club was a positive thing. That's why when these kids managed to break away from the masks and break away from the prescription drugs the teachers give them to keep them normalized and censored, they find solidarity and community and a sense of life. And I was like, I want it to be like Centurions meets Skins meets Deadpool. And then it happened. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And you just spoke eloquently about the appeal of comic books and comic book culture in the first place. It's very much for the outsider, and it's very much, these characters that cast themselves as these icons because they're perceived as other, because they have this outsiderness, this underdog, these stories. And I think, the tie with your music in particular and comic books is that there's something about your songs and your kind of storytelling ability that feels visual in nature, even though it's always listening to music.
I was obsessed with Bowie. You know what I mean? I was so obsessed with Bowie because he created these characters. And trust me, when this next album comes out, it's a full like concept, character driven. I always love theater. I always love comic books. I always love visuals. It's kind of weird. I think visuals died a little bit from rock and roll music. I think that's why rock and roll music became a little bit obsolete, and hip hop completely took over because the visuals were just so incredible. You know what I mean? The visuals were just like mind blowing to me, and it gave you when you have a great visual, it builds a world. You know what I'm saying? You're instantly inside a world, and I think with this next one, I'm a big fan of kind of anime and manga and kind of that, and like I was watching like Spirited Away and Ponyo and like looking at a lot of Miyazaki's work, and I was like, how can I blend this world with comic world? And people might be watching this going, this is sacrilegious, we're going to burn you at the stake. And I'm like, come on baby, burn me alive. And I was like, in this comic book, we are going to go into manga and from a comic book world into a manga world. And this next comic book is about the Ritalin Club. And if no one knows what that is, it's a group of young people who started in a high school, and in that high school they were censored by taking the teachers were given prescription drugs and put masks on them to make sure they couldn't fulfill their full potential and be who they were. But the Ritalin Club rebelled against that, and every single person has a superpower. And this next story is about college. So they've finished high school, now they go to college. And in college, they start to experiment with drugs. And some smart, wise arse bring some acid to the party. And in that party, they take acid and then they go inside the manga world. So to get to the manga world, you take acid and it's another world, and they find themselves battling with versions of themselves inside the manga world. I'm not going to give too much of the story away, but I wanted to blend the worlds. And they get stuck inside the manga world. How will they get back?
And that idea of adolescence and where that ties in with these characters too, I think is pretty exciting. It reminds me of, some of the classic X-Men stories and these ideas of, these misfits that are dealing with this allegorical, big, fanciful world, but are also dealing with very relatable everyday real life
There's
stuff.
a tie in it, and that's it, man. My fans like deal like wanted to create superpowers, like to be seen. Like as I say, there's a brilliant character called Harmony. She's a shapeshifter, and she can't quite figure out if she wants to be male or female yet. So she decides to kind of take on an approach where that doesn't matter, and she doesn't want to announce her pronouns. You know what I mean? She doesn't want to be any gender. She wants to be who she is, and people see that as a negative. I see that as a superpower. I see that as a confidence to kind of go, this is who I am. You know what I'm saying? And there's a character called Zombie Joshua who was killed by one of the teachers, but he's a zombie and he managed to come back to life. You know what I'm saying? And these characters kind of fall in love with each other and kind of go through these experiences in terms of sex, in terms of drugs, in terms of sexuality, in terms of liberation, and it's all heightening this game that we're all playing called life that no one understands, that no one could simply prophesize, and it's a coming of age story. You know what I mean? It ties with my album. The music goes hand in hand with the story because it's called A Weird Time at Quarry Bank, and Quarry Bank is the school where John Lennon, the grammar school where John Lennon went. So I always wanted to tie it back to kind of my roots and what I love.
Yeah.
But the album's called Weird. So as I say, it all ties in with the music.
Chasin the Bird, Charlie Parker in California is exactly what it sounds like. It charts the stories and tall tales and legends based on a whole bunch of research, as you're about to hear, from creator Dave Chisholm, done in collaboration with the estate of the great jazz legend Charlie Parker. All right, everybody. Hey, it's Ryan J. Downey with Z2 Comics, and I gotta say, at Z2, this is maybe the book everyone's the most excited about. You don't want to pick favorites, but Charlie Parker, jazz legend, what a cool book. I want to bring on Dave, one of our fantastic creators, who is doing the Charlie Parker graphic novel with us.
Hey,
what's going on, man?
How's it going, dude?
It's going well. How are you?
I'm great. Well, considering the world is on fire, I'm in my little corner, hunkered down, and I'm doing great. Yeah.
You've got reading material. You're like, as long as you're not like the guy in the Twilight Zone episode where you break your glasses.
Yeah, these things are everything to me right now, for sure.
So tell me a little bit about how you came to be involved with this project. I mean, what an honor, first of all.
Oh yeah, it's huge. So it started way back in like a long time ago, like in 2013, 2014. I pitched a book to Josh at Z2 called Instrumental, and eventually the slow wheel of publishing, eventually they put this book out, and it's a book that I did that is a graphic novel plus a soundtrack of like original music. My background is in music. I have like, a doctorate in jazz trumpet, of all things. And so they put that book out, and I think it's my first published work, and I think it was received well. And so apparently when the Charlie Parker estate connected with Z2 about this, Josh and the powers that be at Z2 were like, "Oh, Dave is the guy to do this," since I have like so much background in studying and learning this music and this history. It was a really good fit, and so I was contacted by them about the book in I believe in August of last year. And
what's that like when you hear even that's
oh yeah,
on the docket and that the estate is involved? It's official. It's not like
it's really a huge honor, and also super stressful.
Right.
Like it's a big responsibility to like get it right, and to kind of speak to all the relevant points that you would encounter when kind of like presenting even a portion of this guy's life, and finding a way to like weave these relevant themes and points into the narrative in a way that's organic and not like an after school special.
Right.
And so I put together a pitch for that, and I submitted it, and here we are. Like, it got approved, and I kind of like went into overdrive. I started working on it in October, and I knew that I wanted to get really far ahead. I had like a pace that I had to keep over the course of the time from when I was hired till like when my deadline was, and so I was like, well, I'm going to start. I know exactly what I want the first 2 chapters of the book to be, and so I just kind of like hit the ground running and set a pace and a really like rigorous, disciplined like workflow. And I actually ended up finishing all of the work on the book, and like all of the line work and all the scripting and line work were done by like mid-March, which is like crazy. And I look back on it and I have no idea how I managed to actually do it. It was kind of crazy, actually. In hindsight, I look back and I'm like, I was just like, locked in this room, like pulling up like one all-nighter a week and everything, trying to like get this, just really obsessed with it. So
now, are you one of these the creatives that I mean, you mentioned a very disciplined workflow and schedule, but do you start to feel like you're channeling something, like it's just you're in the zone and you just can't stop?
I think it's just I think it would be pretty presumptuous for me to claim that I'm channeling anything. I don't want to go there. But when you get in that kind of zone, like when I get in that kind of zone, it's like, not to get corny, but it really feels like you have some sort of something pushing you in the back to kind of like, or lifting you up, or whatever metaphor you want to use.
Yeah. But what would you say are kind of the big points of interest, if you could say even just 2 or 3, that should draw someone to this book?
Well, I'm going to start with an anecdote that to kind of like tell you where my head is with this, right? So there's this jazz composer named Bob Brookmeyer. He died maybe like 10 years ago. He's like in his 80s. And he's a really influential in that scene, right? There are like a number of jazz composers who are like big names in that world now, he's their most influential teacher. So he taught all these people. And at one point in an interview later in his life, the interviewer asked him, like, Bob, who is your favorite composer, like jazz or otherwise? And he said, Bob Brookmeyer. And the interviewer was like taken aback and was like, wow, don't you think that's like going to make you sound really arrogant and stuff? And he said, well, who else is going to make the music that I want to hear? And so with this book, like, I'm going to say that the first thing is that like it's really good. Right? like it's
the book you would want to read.
It's the book that I would want to read, right? So like and I don't want to like throw anybody other creators under the bus, but like sometimes for my taste, nonfiction comics can be kind of boring and kind of dry.
Sure.
And the last thing I wanted to do is to tell this story about Charlie Parker and make it boring, like visually boring, structurally boring, and so on. And so the book is like extremely visually interesting. It's a love letter to jazz music and music in general, and it's a love letter to comics as well. The way the story is told is it's told in 6 vignettes. Each one is narrated by a different person whose life intersected with Charlie Parker's during his time in California, and each one is told in a different visual style. that's intended to reflect the point of view of the person telling the story. So one chapter is told by a photographer, a white kid who was in college, who was just starting out college at the time, and so his style is shaped. The style of his chapter is shaped by his perspective. So it's a little bit more of a simple style because his worldview is simple. It's a little more of like a grid, a basic grid, because at that age and that with his limited perspective, his life is pretty square, right?
Mm-hmm.
And another chapter is narrated by Dizzy Gillespie, and that chapter is super dynamic and visually extremely interesting. Even the way music is depicted in each chapter is a little bit different. So some chapters you see like music notes, like music notation. Other chapters have a more abstract view of what the music is. So it's a really visually ambitious book. It's not just like trying to find the way to present the story. Like I really am at heart, I'm like a formalist with comics, right? I love like messing with comics form. And I know this is like the most long-winded answer to the question you asked.
That's what we do here.
But like, so it's not boring. It's visually interesting. It deals with relevant issues to today. And I'm definitely not going to say that like it presents answers with any definitiveness. Like, look at me, I'm like a straight white guy, like middle class dude. I'm not like, I know that a lot of this stuff isn't necessarily, those elements of the story aren't necessarily mine to tell. So I tried my best to keep the words, like to toe that line with like tons of research and tons of respect and as much sensitivity, like maximum sensitivity to this situation, to the reality of that situation. And I don't know, man, it's just the book turned out so much better than I could have possibly hoped. It wasn't even on my radar before I got that email from Josh at Z2, and then all of a sudden it became like everything to me.
Rock legends The Doors are set to commemorate the 50th anniversary of their landmark album, Morrison Hotel, with a Z2 Comics adaptation from writer Leah Moore. Here's what Leah had to say about it. So when you get this collaborative project and it comes across your desk, so to speak, and you get that, there's always that moment, right, where you're like, oh, I'm so excited, I got this gig. And then probably that next moment that comes of like, what am I going to do? I hope I can do something great. Walk me through that process a little bit. What was the decision-making involved in exactly how you would tackle, more or less adapting or inspired by Morrison Hotel, how that becomes, the written visual medium that we know as comics?
I think it was kind of, there was a decision-making process where there was a bit where I was thinking, oh, well, should they just be comics inspired by the songs? So just kind of whatever pops into my head when I'm listening to it. And to be honest, in another universe, there is the book that was just whatever. Like, but I think that one of the steers that we got was basically that they wanted to get across what was happening, like some of the influences on the group. And I was thinking, oh God, this is going to be hard because I'm not like I know history in places, but I'm not like, amazing at it. So I thought, is it going to be possible to actually get current stuff into them? And but I just I went with what seemed to be a good fit for like something that was happening at the time, and that song, what basically the kind of atmosphere of the song, or the something about, sometimes it was something from the lyrics, but and then I just would dig into that, and it's just slotted. Each time I've done it, it's just slotted into place. So I've gone, oh, that's good, because that matches nicely with this, and that fits nicely. And there's these little like layers and sort of threads that have been suggesting themselves. So it's kind of turning into a book that is about the Doors, and about because all of the events that happened leading up to Morrison Hotel were, that year was basically the year that followed the Miami indecent exposure arrest fiasco. And that year was really tough for all of them. They were all absolutely like, well, all their gigs got cancelled. They had this enormous tour booked to, to go and play, and everyone just cancelled them and went, oh my God, this is, so they had to like scramble about and find gigs, and they had to do all this and so it was a really rough year for them, but also it was a really rough year for America. So I was looking through it and I was going, oh, so what is there? Oh, okay. Oh my gosh. Oh, that's the same year as like Charlie Manson. Oh, right. Okay. And the Zodiac killers. Oh, right. Okay. And the civil rights stuff. Oh my God. And every single thing that you think of in American culture seemed to have had a seed from that 1969, like right there. It was like, Brian Jones dying, and it was like the 60s. There were Altamont, all the
a lot of people point to Altamont as like the official end of all of
it's
that.
Like everybody went like, oh, hang on, this isn't fun anymore. And I think the process of just going through it and going like, it wasn't so much, oh my God, what do I put in? It's like, where do I stop? There's so much, and you can really feel the resonance of it. Like it's just insane, the parallels with now. That's the thing that's blowing my mind about all this. It is not that I am suddenly this massive historian nerd about 1969. It is that 1969, the seeds of what we see now with Black Lives Matter, and with all of the stuff to do with, the government and the environment, and every single thing that you see now on your news feed when you go on Facebook is cropping up in my 1969, specifically what is to do with the Doors, what is to do with LA, what is this tiny little fragment of time, and everything is coming up out of it. So
and 68 was Richard Nixon campaigning on law and order and authoritarian nationalists, and it's
and it was Reagan that was sending in the National Guard to stomp on the People's Park demonstrators, and he sent them with fixed bayonets, a National Guard with gas masks and fixed bayonets against 18-year-old kids who were just going, hey, it'd be cool to plant some flowers. And you go like, Jesus Christ, which bit of that is, but it's really strange watching old videos of Reagan, because I think of Reagan from the 80s, crumbly bumbly Reagan, really kind of confused.
You think about the Genesis Land of Confusion video.
Exactly. And I it's really strange to see him young and shouting about how much he hates hippies, and and I'm just like, really? He's the sort of the old man shouts at clouds thing, and you're like, he's in power, and this is his ticket that he's riding to be elected, and it's blowing my mind in every way. So the Doors are kind of the jumping off point from it, and the songs are, but I'm just basically saying the book, I'm trying to kind of go, what are the songs soaked in? What is it that you're getting from the songs? What is it that they're that they put in, and that you then get out? So I'm hoping to distill all of that into
And
comic.
It's 50 years old, and yet it's just as prescient now, the themes
Yeah.
and the things that were surrounding it, the atmosphere, just
Yeah.
like their music, just like we were talking about at the very top of how timeless the
Yeah.
cool and the essence of the Doors is. So I think that's
Yeah.
fantastic to tie that in story-wise
Yeah.
and thematically like you are. So that's super cool.
I only wish that it was less thematically linked now. I wish there was less of
Yeah.
the like, but do you know what? It's good to listen to that stuff that makes you feel stuff and makes you where would we be?
Yeah. Indeed, especially as we're trapped in our houses watching a lot of this unfold via screens. It's nice to feel a deeper sense of connection. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame guitarist, legend, and icon Robby Krieger was kind enough to talk to us about the Morrison Hotel book. What an incredible milestone to celebrate as another of your classic albums turns 50 this year. Looking back, what about this record feels most significant to you personally?
My favorite part of that record was when we did Roadhouse Blues, which was really pretty cool. We just wanted to do a blues, and so I came up with that riff, and Jim really loved it, so he said, "Robby, keep doing that, and so I kept doing it.
And one of the things I've been thinking about is how the late 60s and early 70s has so many parallels to a lot of the things happening around the world right now. Certainly it seems like this adds another layer of relevance to the music that you were making back then. What lessons do you think we can all learn from that as we look toward the future?
Well, the Doors we like to say we were unpolitical, and we tried to stay out of all that stuff, but it's pretty hard to do. There was, I think our most political song was 5 to 1. So 5 to 1, no one here gets out alive. And he was talking about the fact that at that time there was more people under 30 than over 30. So in his mind, we could just take over, just from the sheer numbers. And it's kind of looking like that today. You see all these young people out in the streets and, free speech and doing their thing. And it looks like things might actually change. I hope for the better.
Now, last year was also the 50th anniversary of San Diego Comic-Con, which makes another interesting parallel between comic book history and, of course, the history of your band. Have you ever attended San Diego Comic-Con or any comic book show for that matter?
I really haven't, but I would like to. There was some talk of my band playing at Comic-Con when it was in L.A. 2 years, I guess, ago. But we never got that together, unfortunately. But maybe next year.
Now, while the Doors certainly enjoyed massive commercial success, your music has always appealed to us outsiders and outcasts, the metalheads, the comic book weirdos. What do you think it is about the spirit of the Doors that keeps it so relevant to every new generation of folks like us on the fringe?
I think it's the fact that we were so weird. We were so different than everybody else. We had the elements of jazz, flamenco, blues, classical, anything you could think of, we did it. And we just had good songs. We would never put a song on an album that we didn't think was great. And, there was no filler.
Anything else you'd like to add, maybe for aspiring artists or musicians who might be watching?
I would say everybody has an artist inside of them somehow, and you just have to find it. You have to find your thing, For me, it was the guitar, and, before that I tried trumpet. I wasn't much good at that. But when I went to my buddy's house up the street, and he had a guitar, And I would start playing that thing. I could feel it. It was like, wow, this works for me. So you got to find out what works for you, whether it's painting or music or acting, or and I think everybody has an artist inside them, some type of artist. So you just have to find it.
Grateful Dead Origins looks to be the definitive history of a very special and important period in the time of the iconic band, as well as in American history. We got the creative team of the book together to chat about all things Grateful Dead. David, hopping back over to you. As I mentioned, comic book collectors are known to be happily obsessed with collecting things. I think a great way to continue to introduce you to the comic book audience is to tell us a little bit about how your happy obsession with the Grateful Dead led to collecting tapes of their shows and how that evolved into your current job.
Well, it was exactly that the Dead, I think it's widely known amongst Deadheads, but the Dead have always allowed tapers to record their shows, and then within that, Deadheads were trading all of the tapes, never for sale. And so when I was 15, 16, 17 years old, I amassed a massive tape collection of different live shows. And it got to the point where you use the word obsessed, and you just want to get more. And then you want to get more that are also extremely good quality. And from that, developed a passion for archiving, because I realized I had these hundreds and hundreds, thousand live tapes. And then I realized that these things, I knew that magnetic tape would wear out someday. And so I got really into archiving, and specifically archiving film. And it was through that in the mid-90s, late 90s, when I was doing a master's degree in film archiving, that I wrote the Dead a very simple letter, Dick Latvala, the Dead's original archivist. And I wrote him a very simple letter just saying, I'd like to check out your film archive. And he invited me to California. I checked it out. And while I was there, kind of gave some ideas for the video collection, and kind of let them know that if you need somebody to catalog the video collection, Dick was an audio archivist. I'd love to do it. And they invited me down. It was a 3-month contract in early 1999, a little over 20 years ago. And then those contracts led to a couple more. And then later in 1999, Dick Latvala passed away, and they needed somebody to do the archiving. I was already literally in the vault, and so they just said you should stick around. So I stayed, and the passion for the Dead's music and the tapes and the preservation of those tapes, and now that we do the archival CD releases, also making them accessible through these archival things, it kind of all grew into one. So it's been this kind of continuity going back to when I was about 14 or 15 years old to now that I'm older than that, and I'm still listening to the same music I was listening to when I was a teenager.
And did you have any encounters or experience or fandom of your own in the comic world or in the graphic novel
Not
medium?
really, no. Some things that people had given me and turned me on to, not so much. But a lot of my friends, a lot of Deadhead friends, are extremely passionate about this world. And so when I told them a couple of years ago that this was something we were exploring, they were really excited about it. And the people involved are known commodities. So it's been a really it's been interesting getting their perspective on it, because they're the ones that I would turn to and ask about, because I look at it as a Deadhead. I think it's phenomenal. I ask them as comic book fans, and I say, what do you think of this? And they think, I think it's phenomenal. So it's been interesting, because it's a very, like you say, it's a very similar level of obsession. And I say that in a good way.
Of course.
It's something that we're very passionate about. And what I found is that the nuances that all of my Deadhead friends know about Grateful Dead shows and Grateful Dead tapes is exactly the same in that world too, where the nuances, and that I find amazing. And so that's been a big learning curve for me. And then now that the book is done, it's it's kind of like producing a box set, and then it's done, and then you're kind of hungry and say, well, what's next? And so it's been an incredible project, and it's the sort of thing where we suss these things out. We don't go into partnerships on anything, whether it's a t-shirt license or whatever it is. We never do that with just anyone. We do our research, and that's exactly what happened here. And by the time we went into full production on this, we knew the team pretty well, and we knew what we were getting into. And then the final result was infinitely better than we even expected. And our expectations were pretty high. So
nice.
Cool stuff. Yeah.
So David, let's talk a little bit to Chris and Noah then. That was a great segue to introduce them more into the conversation. Guys, let's start with Chris and then Noah. If each of you could talk to us a little bit about how you came to be involved with this and what your experience and knowledge about all things dead was prior to becoming involved.
I'm a New York City kid, played in bands and whatnot, so I knew the Dead just from going into music as a kid and, you know, listening to 70s music and things like that. As far as this project went, I had gone out with some people at Warner for, we went to a play, and afterwards we're at a pizza place, and I was talking to Mark Pincus of Rhino about this, and he had mentioned that Josh and Sridhar had hit them up and were talking about doing a Grateful Dead graphic novel. It was the first I heard about it. We were literally eating pizza, and I kind of was like, oh, that's interesting. 10 minutes later, I threw out the movie Backbeat. It was a 90s film. I'm pretty sure Steven Dorff was in it. He was the bad guy vampire in Blade.
Yes.
Anyway,
He'll be familiar to comic book fans that way.
Yeah. I kind of think it was around the same time. And I was like, oh, it's a bad guy. Whatever. Who cares about my Steven Dorff 90s fetish? I don't have that either. I don't have a Steven Dorff.
Outed himself.
I talked to I remember turning back to Mark and going like, you ever see Backbeat, 90s, Steven Dorff, vampire, and like you do something like that. You just show them as dudes and they're just who they are, whatever it is leading up to it. You do like a 101, and then the circus of everything that everybody knows historically would happen, and you still just kind of try to show them as guys in a band. I was not pitching the book. I didn't want it. I wasn't thinking about this. I've never written any kind of biography. You know, this is a narrative biography with some leeway, but very, very fact driven because of the nature of Grateful Dead fans, and you know, every fan knows every set list from their favorite show, and so things like that. I'm kind of hippy dippy in my life to begin with, just normally getting into that kind of thinking about, that's got to be right. Someone's going to catch something. I would catch it if it was a really interesting project for me in that regard to tackle, to write. But that aside, a couple weeks later, man, Josh called me. He was like, you wanna pitch for this? And I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, something about a pizza place. And that's kind of how it started.
Nice. Yeah, I can understand that trepidation because you don't want to become the like organic web shooters person of the Deadhead community. Like one continuity mistake and you're crucified forever. But it also helps, of course. Obviously, you're working right alongside. So
just to nerd out on that, I had so many just physical moisture questions about how he did that.
There's a lot of there. Yeah, there were some of the allegory was laid on a little thick too, pun intended, in that in that scene. So yes. So Noah, let's hear a little bit then about how you came to join this project.
Well, I'm from Denver, Colorado, so I'm very familiar with the Dead.
Yes. I believe the Dead was legalized in Denver.
Yeah. So, and also I was a music cartoonist for the Denver Alternative Weekly called Westward for 8 years. I just would, they had me interview different bands and then draw the interview out as like a musical comic strip. So I did so much, people playing guitars and things like that. I kind of had the training for this. But I was brought on board because my aesthetic as a cartoonist is very underground, like 1960s style. And when they approached me, it was about, we're not looking for somebody who's going to make a documentary on paper as much as somebody who's going to make something that feels right for the time that it's taking place in, and has something interesting and something very stylized, was the way that I was approached to it. So I didn't think about like, I'm making a documentary on paper. I thought, I'm making a graphic novel about this band, and people are going to insert, like Dead fans who are really familiar with the Dead are going to insert the actual people into what I draw. Like I'm just like basically like creating these shapes that people are gonna like insert their love of the dead into, and like
like a vessel for
exactly
spiritual connectivity. Yeah.
So my whole thing was like that. Like I'm gonna make a graphic novel about the dead, like about their history, and I'm gonna make it be its own thing, and stay away from like I'm not gonna pull my hair out thinking like, did I get this thing exactly right? Like, are they standing where they would have been on this on the stage at that time and stuff like that? Like, I'm just gonna tell this fucking story. Sorry to curse, and and I'm gonna make it really entertaining. And I've had a lot of people approach me like, I'm not even a Grateful Dead fan, but I want to get that comic. Like, it looks so great and stuff.
Right.
So I feel like I kind of did my job there because it's pulling a lot of people into this world, and I'm excited to be pulled into this world as well. Like I want to just like immerse myself even further into this world of like the Grateful Dead and stuff. So it was like a really cool like entryway into this like community that I'm hoping will accept me and take me in.
Well, I think given your credentials with Mad Magazine alone, there's some continuity between the literary and the subtle humor that the Dead also embodies.
And that's another thing. Like knowing about Jerry Garcia's love of comics, like that, I was just like, when I was looking into that, I'm like, I would totally get along with this guy. Like, I wish I could have a conversation with him about like our favorite old Mad magazines and EC and stuff. And I know he was a big Will Elder fan, and so am I. So I was like, when I'm drawing this, I'm like, I'll bet he would love what I'm doing right now. Like, I wish he could see this, you know?
Inspired by the great British tradition of the hardback annual, Z2 presents the Gorillaz Almanac, the first ever Gorillaz annual, collecting over 120 pages of full-color Gorillaz-related art from the Grammy-nominated artists. Now, I had the unique opportunity to do an interview with one of the Gorillaz, 2D. 2D, thanks for joining us. I know you were very, very busy. We appreciate you making the time. How's the Almanac coming along?
What? Oh, I thought this was online yoga. Right. Well, yeah, everything's brilliant. Cheers.
2D, where do your ideas come from?
My head. Especially after I bang it on something.
2D, how would you advise somebody who wants to break into comics?
Well, you get some scissors, snip the plastic, open the front cover, and go from there, really.
I hope you all enjoyed that half as much as I did. Be sure to head over to z2comics.com and follow Z2 Comics on social media to stay up to date on all the projects you just heard about and a whole bunch of stuff that you haven't heard about yet. You guys have been great, and I've been Ryan J. Downey.